On April 27, 2010, a group of construction workers in Xinghua Village, located in Heilongjiang, China, were on their break, sitting at the canteen for lunch. The group of workers got very angry due to the long wait for their food, and when they went to confront the cook, he was nowhere to be found. This cook was 65-year-old Liu Xiuyun, and as he was the eldest of his family, some called him Liu Boss. One of the workers went to Xiuyun's home and found the front door open. He shouted at him several times but nobody answered, so he entered Xiuyun's home and looked around. Although the lights were still turned on, nobody was home, so he left empty-handed. Most of the workers were not terribly concerned for Xiuyun's safety and instead upset that they had to go hungry. 20 years prior, Xiuyun had been divorced and living alone ever since. While most didn't seem to care too much for Xiuyun's disappearance, there were still a select few who found it odd. He had been unemployed for a long time. Not many employers in the village were willing to hire him at his age. So when he finally was hired to be a cook for the construction workers, it seemed odd that he would abandon his first real job in a long time so quickly. Eventually, someone asked his family about him, and his brother, 46-year-old Liu Laoliu, was the first to hear about his disappearance. Laoliu started by looking for Xiuyun in areas where he was known to spend his spare time. After spending his whole afternoon trying to look for Xiuyun and coming back empty-handed, he went to the police station to file a report. The police, for their part, didn't have much enthusiasm for the case and barely even looked for Xiuyun, while Laoliu returned home and waited for any news. On April 29, some of the other villagers needed to meet with Laoliu for something work-related. They went to his home, and just like with his brother before him, the door was open and the lights were turned on, even though nobody was home. The villagers briefly searched for him, but when they couldn't find him, they decided to call his cell phone. The cell phone was, however, turned off, which was unusual and out of character for Laoliu. After failing to find any trace of him, his family reported him missing to the police. The police were completely blindsided and shocked, and his family walked in to report him missing, because by all appearances it seemed the police themselves were the last to see Laoliu alive when he came in earlier to report his brother missing to them. Initially, Xiuyun's disappearance could have been dismissed as him running away to try and find better work outside his rural village, but his brother going missing only 2 days later was far more suspicious. It finally motivated the police to conduct a proper investigation into the two cases. The local police called for assistance from neighboring villages so they could borrow officers to form a task force dedicated solely to investigating this case. On May 7, that task force was formed. As mentioned earlier, Xiuyun had been living alone for 20 years and rarely had any contact with those outside his family. Laoliu was a different story. He was much more involved in the community as a farmer and working a few other odd jobs and side businesses, earning him many friends in the village. Since Laoliu had more of a social life and owned a cell phone which he frequently used, Xiuyun was again mostly the secondary focus, since police believed there would be a higher chance of tracking down Laoliu, and that the two cases were likely connected anyway. The police obtained Laoliu's cell phone records and bills, which showed him calling many people until the day of his disappearance, when the calls suddenly stopped. Based on this, the police believed that Laoliu likely didn't intend to be away for long and that whatever caused his disappearance happened suddenly. After going through his phone records, the police took interest in one particular number in his contacts. This number Laoliu had called twice. Those two calls were made on April 29, the day he went missing. That number was traced to 40-year-old Su Hong, the local doctor and the owner and operator of the village's medical clinic. Despite being married, Hong's marriage was not a happy one. So 9 years prior, she moved back into her old, now deceased parents' home and had been living there alone except for the weekdays, where she lived with her 4 children, 3 of them adopted. The police went to question her at her home. Hong told the police that she once borrowed 5,000 yuan from Xiuyun in 2009 and another 10,000 from Laoliu in order to fund treatment for her children who had fallen ill in 2009. But according to Hong, she had already paid the brothers back. Upon questioning the other villagers, they confirmed that Hong did indeed borrow money from them, but all attested to Hong's good character. When Hong was asked to explain the calls, she said she called him in order to ask him to come over so she could return the money, and after he left she never saw him again. The police conducted a search effort, attempting to find any bodies or at least anything that would be out of place in the small village. Both of these efforts came up empty-handed. The next 3 days of the investigation were largely fruitless, until a new lead suddenly came to the police. On May 10th, Laoliu's sister was sent a text from her missing brother. The message read as follows: "Let me be honest with you. I accidentally killed Big Brother. I said I was going to Shandong to find his son, and he got anxious, not letting us approach his son. Why is he like this? At that time, we had been drinking and got into an argument with him. He got up, so I pushed him back, probably too hard. He didn't stand steady, and his head hit the door frame. When I checked, he had no pulse. I was scared, so I took care of Big Brother by moving his motorcycle. I was afraid of getting caught, so I left." The police then raided both of the brothers' respective homes for evidence, putting much emphasis on the search of Laoliu's property. Since the text message stated that Laoliu pushed Xiuyun and he hit his head against the door frame, that is where police and forensics concentrated their search. The police saw no signs of a struggle, Xiuyun's fingerprints couldn't be found, and luminol tests revealed no blood on the doorframe. A search of the home itself also led to the police finding 3,000 yuan just lying around, which would have made no sense if Laoliu was fleeing and going on the run. By all accounts, it would appear that Laoliu didn't send that text and that this story was made up. Upon further examination of the text message, this seemed even more likely. Laoliu was not properly educated, made many typos, and didn't even know how to use punctuation marks. A stark contrast to this perfectly written text message with proper use of punctuation marks. After both the police and his family caught on to this, they decided to call his number only for no one to answer, as the phone was yet again turned off. The police further checked the phone, and it made no calls, with its only use between April 30th and May 10th, being to send that text message. Throughout the next week the phone would be turned back on, only to send the same text message 10 times to various different people, mostly his family members. This message did not add any real new insight and simply said, "I killed Big Brother. I feel awful. I can never come back again. I did it myself, it's unrelated to anyone else. I'm leaving, take care of yourselves." The police questioned this. Why would he explicitly say it's unrelated to anyone else? This sounds like a cover-up. This text, combined with the oddly convenient timing of the last calls and the perfect grammar, led to the police once again investigating Su Hong, since she was well educated. After talking more to the family, they were even more suspicious. One of Laoliu's other brothers told an officer that he had drunkenly told him that, "If I die, it will be Su Hong who kills me." On May 19th, the police returned to Hong's home to question her further. Hong had answered the police's questions calmly. However, when the police asked if she owned a cellar, Hong reacted a bit more panicked and denied owning a cellar. The police were skeptical of this, since in Heilongjiang almost every household owned a cellar to store food and vegetables over the winter. So when the police began searching Hong's yard, sure enough, they did find a cellar entrance hidden under a pile of leaves. As soon as the police opened the entrance, they were immediately greeted by a foul stench, confirming that they were in the right location. The cellar seemed to have been in use for quite some time, and even from the outside, the police could observe numerous empty plastic bags, clothing, and human feces. Upon realizing what the police were doing, Hong became even more panicked and hurriedly rushed over, attempting to obstruct the police from investigating the cellar. However, the police mostly ignored her efforts and grabbed a nearby rake from the ground to probe the cellar from outside. During this process, they discovered two brand new sheets, one blue and one green. Due to the overwhelming stench and the presence of decomposing feces, the police had to wear gas masks before descending into the cellar. Their suspicions were confirmed when they unearthed the 2 sheets, revealing corpses within. The police brought the discovered bodies to the surface. They opened the 2 sheets, and while they had been heavily decomposed, they were still able to recognize them as Xiuyun and Laoliu. Hong was swiftly arrested, and the news quickly spread to everyone in the village, who were in disbelief that Hong was the culprit, with many straight up refusing to believe it. According to the initial forensic examination, the 2 brothers had died of strangulation. After being interrogated, Hong confessed to the murders. Since she had recently borrowed money from Xiuyun and later Laoliu, the 2 often used paying off her debt as an excuse to visit her at her home and even her clinic. And tragically, they also used this opportunity to assault Hong in a way of paying off her debt. As one may expect, Hong was miserable and saddened by this treatment and desperately sought a way out. On April 22, according to some reports, Xiuyun had apparently fallen in love with a woman outside the village, and was even planning to marry her. In preparation for this, Xiuyun decided to stop assaulting Hong, on the condition that she paid her entire debt with interest. On April 26, she invited Xiuyun to her home to repay the money. Before his arrival, she drugged his drink. Once Xiuyun arrived, he quickly passed out, and Hong took advantage of this opportunity by grabbing a hemp rope and strangling him with it. Subsequently, she wrapped his body in a sheet and secured it with rope. 3 days later, she used the same method to lure Laoliu into her home, where she killed him in a similar manner. Hong concluded by disposing of both brothers' bodies in the family cellar. Hong had confessed, the police saw nothing wrong with her confession, and the brothers' bodies had been found. Only, the case wasn't over. The police felt something was odd, as the brothers had both died relatively recently, but that cellar was still rancid and filled with human feces, so they thought something else was hidden down there. They were right to think so, as the officers still searching the cellar to clear it out and possibly find any more evidence such as the murder weapon, but they instead found a completely different human skeleton, fully skeletonized with no flesh or skin remaining. The skeleton belonged to a woman. The police collected DNA samples from the remains and compared them to the families of any local missing person cases. The results quickly came back, and they identified her as Su Hong's sister-in-law Liu Xiuyun. After being interrogated for 2 days straight, Hong broke, and finally confessed. Hong's background and life were understandably a large factor in these tragic events. Hong was born in 1970 in Ning'an. She had both a younger brother and sister, so her parents instructed her to do most of the household chores. In school, Hong studied medicine, and in 1986 she enrolled after her graduation. In 1990 she resigned in order to open a small clinic by herself. In 1994, she married her high school boyfriend. This decision was criticized by her family, as she gave up a career for this wedding. After getting married, she moved into her husband's house in a different village. Their marriage wasn't meant to last. Her husband was almost immediately cheating on her with other women. Hong wanted to divorce him, but her parents talked her out of it. In this small village, divorce was heavily frowned upon, and it would likely ruin Hong's reputation and set her life back. Eventually, she had a child with her husband. Hong had hoped the birth of their child would fix their relationship, but instead, he didn't seem to care and left all the parenting to Hong. Eventually, when Hong's daughter was 9 months old, her husband left the village to go to work in the south of China. As he was the main provider and was now on practically the complete opposite side of China, Hong was left without a source of income, so she took her daughter and returned to her hometown, where she reopened her clinic. Upon her arrival, Hong's life didn't get any easier. Since her siblings also left to go work in the south, Hong had to care for her parents, her nieces and nephews, her own daughter, and run the village's clinic at the same time. The clinic was not enough to provide for this many people, so eventually she was forced to work on a farm, drive a tractor, and all the work normally delegated to the men of the village. In 2001, Hong learned from others that while working in southern China, her husband had started another affair with a local woman, moved in with her and even got her pregnant. This was the final straw for Hong. She divorced her husband and began to fully settle into her home in the village. In November of 2005, Xiuyun, Hong's sister-in-law, returned to the village after working in Ningbo in the Zhejiang province. The reunion started off poorly since Xiuyun started off by asking to stay with her and to borrow 10,000 yuan. Hong said she could stay, but she could not lend the money because of what her husband, Xiuyun, her brother, did to her. She got angry when Hong refused to give the money. Later that day, Hong heard from her mother that Xiuyun was also having an affair, and this probably being the reason she came back. Also, the nerve to ask her for money while knowing what she was been through made her mad. But the cheating in particular angered Hong greatly. She decided to act upon this anger once Xiuyun went to sleep in her home. Hong got a piece of hemp rope and strangled Xiuyun before disposing of her body in the cellar. Afterwards, Hong wrote a fake letter and snuck it into Xiuyun's family home. The letter stated that she had left the village for work with someone else and not to look for her. Her affair was common knowledge and the talk of the town, so nobody was suspicious or even looked for her. To better hide the body and smell, she would use the cellar to dispose of any garbage, dumping it in there and later shoveling up feces and dumping it in as well. Hong likely would have never been caught if not for the Liu brothers having their disappearance properly investigated. Once the full story went public and was talked about on the news across China, many felt immense sympathy for Hong and were hoping she would get a reduced sentence, if any sentence at all. Hong, on the other hand, appeared to actually want the death penalty, telling the media that she would rather die than walk free and have everyone look at her, knowing what she did. The only thing she wondered was, why do men always treat me like this? In January of 2011, Hong's prosecution began and she was quickly found guilty. Hong made no attempt to defend herself, confessed to her crimes and went out of her way to express no remorse, urging the court to sentence her to death as soon as possible. The only thing Hong was concerned about was what would happen to her children afterwards. The Mudanjiang City Court of Heilongjiang Province granted Hong her wish and sentenced her to death. On February 10, 2012, Su Hong was executed.